Welcome again to Best of Trek, Worst of Trek, the show where we rank every live-action episode in the Star Trek franchise. Bookending our block are stories of daring female Ferengi pioneers of investment and opportunity. Thanks for joining me. I'm your host, Dustin Wing. In Search of Profits at 266. Lobes for Business. Or Rules of Acquisition. Quark's new eager waiter, Pell, impresses him. Enough to include in negotiations at the behest of the Grand Nagus, with the Gamma Quadrant Karma. Despite botching the initial negotiations, Quark takes Pell to their homeworld and won't take no for an answer. This gives us a chance to see that the misogynistic Ferengi society does have cracks in it, as Pell reveals herself to be a female with lobe extensions. Which is a big no-no. More than that, she's got feelings for Quark, which leaves him confused for a while. Until the Nagus learns that he was duped too, and it costs Quark his Gamma Quadrant profits. You know, except the ones he built in and blames on Rom. This is one of DS9's best early episodes, tackling women's rights. It contains a bunch of firsts. The first mention of the Dominion and the Karma, the first we see Tongo being played, and the first time we see a Ferengi female. Giving up on choreography at 265, tit for tat. Or Arena. Visiting Cestus 3, a landing party expecting to be treated to a lavish reception by a notorious Commodore, finds themselves beamed into a trap. The whole colony's been wiped out, and even the Enterprise comes under attack and can't beam them up. It's kind of weird at first that the red shirt just disintegrates, though this attack isn't seen again, as the enemy rains down simple mortar fire on them as they scramble. Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, and William Shatner all got permanent tinnitus for their trouble with the explosions in this episode. Once the ground and space battles even out, the respective crews are retrieved, and the Enterprise surpasses its safe cruising speed to catch up with the alien ship, only for both to be stopped dead in space for seemingly no reason. This is when us Trekkies are first introduced to the Gorn, as the captains of both ships are transported to a desert planet and told to fight it out for the lives of their crew. While I do find this episode quite good, let's be honest, it also gives us a couple of the worst fight scenes in the history of Star Trek and maybe all of television. I've seen fans recently complain that the new Gorn are too fast, and couldn't be the Gorn that fought Kirk here. And I agree. It's probably the best example of a retcon in the history of retconning, because the dude in the rubber suit doesn't work, even when the premise does. Kirk and the Gorn keep trying to one-up each other using the terrain as a weapon, till Kirk ends up building a bamboo cannon to best his opponent. The Metrons that pit the sides against each other to begin with are impressed with Kirk's compassion to not kill his foe in the end. This is a benevolent godlike race that I hope we see again in the franchise. All in all, one of TOS's classics that has action, exploration of the human condition, and a healthy dose of so bad it's good hokiness. Looking for answers at 264, parental impairment. Or The Raven, as Voyager negotiates with the umpteenth xenophobic race in the Delta Quadrant wearing football helmets, Seven starts seeing visions of a three-eyed raven, or something, which leads her to go crazy, steal a shuttle, and enters field goal range in the 49ers territory. Or it turns out a beacon sent by her parents' originally crashed vessel that they were studying the Borg on is to blame for her visions and behavior. Tuvok, originally sent to return her to Voyager, helps her explore and really expose us in the audience to her backstory of parents that thought it was a good idea to take their young child on a Borg hunting expedition. As all great 7 of 9 centered episodes do, there's wonderful bookend moments talking about the nature of humanity with Janeway, this time in Da Vinci's workshop. This was the first episode we got a chance to see Seven's backstory be more than just the Borg. On her long road from Borg drone to drunken vigilante to commander in Starfleet, strengthening the case for the Prime Directive at 263, noble ambitions, or cogenitor. I'm going to skip the usual recap because there's a huge rift in the fanbase on this one. with an average IMDb rating of 7.7 and opinions ranging from the worst episode of Star Trek to a better episode of Enterprise, I'm somewhere in between. Upon first watch for these rankings, we put this hundreds below its current position. Like The Outcast before it, an interesting depiction of non-binary life forms that aspire to be more, only to be ripped away at the last minute. It feels cheap and callous to members of the trans and non-binary communities when Archer denies asylum. While that was my first reaction too, after watching this several times, its case for the Prime Directive is clear. In a species with less than 3% of the population made up by this third gender of people, it may feel morally reprehensible to not teach them to read and have aspirations of their own. But with one of the biggest howevers in the run of Trek, it's way above Archer's purview to fundamentally change a society that depends on that slim 3% margin to even exist. I really hope in the long term that the Vissians are able to see the error of their ways, but the consequences of Trip's conscience as Archer comes at him with the news that the cogenitor's dead is just too moving of a scene to relegate the episode to a poor ranking for the depiction of an, at first glance, oppressive race. Trip's view of the galaxy through the eyes of Florida Man can be a really unique perspective, as he generally seeks to do good, but like every headline that starts with Florida Man, his best intentions have unintended consequences. And the weight of that will hopefully better shape his view of non-interference going forward. But hey, Reed's apparently having a good time eating flavorful cheese. Coming out of retirement at 262, setting the tone. Or Remembrance, coming back 25 years after the close of TNG, with Picard and Data playing poker in 10 forward on the D, to the tune of Isa Briones singing Blue Skies, is hands down the best opening sequence to a Star Trek show to date. While I'll say the episode does a better job setting the stakes of the season than introducing all our characters, I personally appreciate the slow-building nature of Picard's seasons. But a pilot should introduce you to all your main characters as a matter of course, and it kind of fails there. Partially as we're introduced to Dahj, who won't make it out of the pilot, though she's just the setup for her twin Soji to be introduced at the very end of the episode. As the Romulans try to apprehend her, she activates, whatever that actually means, and kills them all after they slaughter her boyfriend. For some reason, unbeknownst to both her and the viewers, she's then drawn to trespass on Picard's vineyard to seek the help of a 90-year-old man with less authority as the days pass, after he gives a scathing interview condemning Starfleet. The aging winemaker has taken a pair of Romulan housecarls that will barely become important to the plot. Unfortunately, after Dahj brings up some interesting threads from Picard's past, he goes to his private storage with this wonderful Captain Picard Day callback, and the coolest unfolding box ever. I'm all for a future where boxes like this exist. Here he learns Dahj is based on a painting Data made before his demise. As he exits the facility, Dahj tracks him down, only for the most improbable explosion to somehow not kill Picard, or even land him in the hospital, but sadly takes an early character we want to care about in a Game of Thrones moment pretty quickly. We finally get our first look at the often-mentioned Daystrom Institute in spectacular fashion here, as we're introduced to Agnes Dorati, our AI specialist, and former girlfriend to the confrontational Bruce Maddox. The episode is a bit all over the place, but sets up an interesting mystery and the slow-building tone of the rest of the season. Being tracked at 261, Gone Huntin', or Prey. In Voyager's third interaction with the Hirogen, the Hunter race is f***ing around and finding out with species 8472, which proves to be more prey than these hunters had bargained for. Voyager responds to their distress call and takes aboard the lone survivor, and unknowingly takes the prey aboard as well, as Janeway decides the ethical course of action to take to stop this citizen of fluidic space. Seven's like, burn them, burn burn them all! To the point that after they communicate with 8472 and Kathy's ready to rethink how she deals with the species, Seven takes it upon herself to beam 8472 to a Hirogen vessel and save Voyager. What's said at the end between Captain Janeway and 7 of 9 about whose fault it is and who's wrong? I don't think either are right, and it's a very rare yet interesting close to an episode of Voyager on a muted moment of angst. Negotiating peace at 260, diplomatic immunity, or ceasefire. Two of Trek's best recurring actors, Jeffrey Combs and Susie Plaxton, putting on blue makeup and antennae was a sign that by the middle of Season 2, Enterprise had worked through the worst of its run, and the longest part of its road had already been paved. As Shran asks for Archer's assistance in negotiations with the Vulcans over a planet they've both claimed at one time or another over the last few hundred years. What we've seen in Trek's past is a key part of what the Federation does. Archer gets his first taste of, being an intermediary in interstellar diplomacy. While the trust of Shran is what brings him to the table, Ambassador Saval brings his usual lack of any basic respect for Archer as a person. Shran's second-in-command, Susie the Blue, isn't as ready to negotiate as her boss, and has their troops shoot down Archer and Saval's shuttle pod, which leaves them in the middle of a war zone. The whole thing comes to a perfectly Star Trek climax, as bits of both armies converge and Archer forces Shran to choose between his word versus the trust of his subordinate. It's another wonderful episode that builds the friendship between Archer and Shran, and gives Trip a chance to Florida man it up in the captain's chair. And our last entry today at 2:59, Mother Knows Best. Or Family Business. As Quark laments his nephew becoming the first Ferengi in Starfleet, Liquidator Brunt shows up and informs Quark his mother Ishka is accused of earning profits back on the Ferengi homeworld. He and Rom go back to Ferenginar, and we get our first look at the first of 3 actresses to play Moogie. I also find the idea of a planet where it's always raining that towels near the door are a nice courtesy. Turns out their mother has amassed quite the little fortune, and after some brotherly shenanigans, they get their mother to take her clothes off and confess to some of it while hiding the bulk of her profits. This is another great stepping stone in the Star Trek exploration of human condition of sexism and patriarchy through one of the most misogynistic cultures in the galaxy.
Ah, computer. That program is available.
Thanks, Major. Thanks, Major.
Propulsion systems are offline.
Thanks,